All right, so let's talk about this kind of weird phenomenon that I've noticed lately when it comes to jobs and job boards. So something is not adding up. We've seen lately a lot of companies having these massive layoffs. I mean, Amazon had one of their biggest layoffs in history, if not their biggest. But if you go and look at the job boards, what you're going to see is that the companies that have these layoffs are still hiring people. And even weirder is that they're hiring for the same positions that they just laid off. The other thing is that I've seen a lot of people applying for jobs and they just get these sort of blanket, almost immediate rejections without any explanation. And the jobs that they apply for continue to stay up. So it's not like they're being filled and they just, they're picking somebody else. It's the jobs are just up and they're staying up. They're not, people are applying and they're qualified, but they're not getting hired. So what is the likely explanation for this? And I think one of the most likely explanations is it's pretty simple, and it's that these jobs, many of these jobs that these companies are posting, just they don't exist, right? They're not real jobs. And there's actually a term for this. It's called ghost jobs. And ghost jobs, posting ghost jobs is not only a common practice, it's actually considered normal, and it's been going on for a long time. And there are different reasons organizations will post ghost jobs. Sometimes they anticipate a future need that doesn't quite exist yet. They're not ready to hire yet for a position, but they want to have that talent pool available to them. They sort of want to, think of like prime the pump, if you will. They anticipate a future need, so they're going to go ahead and, collect resumes, figure out kind of what's out there. And that'll also give them an idea of the market rate, right? So what are we going to have to pay if we do actually ever hire for these positions? What are we going to have to pay? What's the market rate? Okay. So obviously, if you're looking for a job, you don't want to waste your time applying to ghost jobs, right? Now, that doesn't mean that, nothing good could come of it, because you might apply for a ghost job and, 6 months or a year goes by, but then eventually your resume kind of gets passed around and you do get hired because you applied. So I'm not saying, stranger things have happened. But you should be able to make that decision, right? You should be able to look at a posting and decide, okay, is this a ghost job and do I want to apply for it, or is this just a waste of my time? Okay. So there's several hallmark indicators I've noticed with these ghost jobs. One of them, and of course dealing with technology, is that the requirements, the qualifications when it comes to your skills and your technologies that your tech stack basically, it's going to be very vague, right? They're going to ask for very generic things that, quite honestly, somebody who's in the IT world would never word things this way, but they'll be like, you should have skills in API development. Okay. Or cloud, or it may be very generic, like AI engineering or just GraphQL. So it might be something kind of specific, but it won't mention how it all fits together, right? It won't necessarily mention the full stack, okay? And I think that's a huge warning sign. When it mentions like databases, cloud, APIs, but there's no stack, like it doesn't say, MERN stack or anything like that. Okay, why don't you tell me what stack you're working with? That's kind of weird, right? So to me, that indicates a lack of seriousness. It indicates a lack of research, and it really strongly suggests that none of the technologies they're asking for is actually being used currently, right? So what they're probably doing is they sort of have a vague idea of what they want. Somebody from HR probably put this into, GPT and was like, create a job description for me. And it's very vague, right? It's very vague. So I think the way I deal with this is when talking with the recruiter, I will ask very specifically, what are you trying to build? What is this role going to be building and doing? And if they come back with just a list of technologies, like, well, you need to know this, you need to know that, and that's a warning sign, right? That they're not trying to build anything. They don't have anything in mind. They're just basically saying, well, they're trying to hide the fact that it's a ghost job. Okay. So that's one thing. The other warning sign is if it's an established company. Okay. So we're not talking about a startup here. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not talking about a startup or a very small company, but an established company, think mid-sized to a large company. If the job posting asks you to wear multiple hats or to be able to kind of switch between roles, that's a very clear sign that the posting is not for a real job. Okay. In larger companies, even mid-sized companies, roles are very siloed. Okay. So you've got your role, and whoever's working in that particular role, they've got a list of technologies and things that they touch, and they are not allowed to venture outside of their silo. Okay. Right. So I'll give you an example. Place I used to work, I was a Citrix support engineer. So I dealt with Citrix. Okay. If I needed a VMware server restarted, I didn't have access to do it, right? I had to go, there was a VMware team for that, okay? So that's what I mean when I say roles in these mid to large organizations are siloed. So why on earth, think about it. If you see a job posting that has a certain title, right? They list a certain title. Let's say it's, whatever, AI engineer. Okay, that's sort of the hot thing now. AI engineer. But then you look at the listing and it asks for, well, you need to be able to wear multiple hats. We want an AI engineer who can also do other stuff too. Why would you put a very specific job title, but then in the description you're listing things that are very generic and very general and wouldn't even necessarily apply to AI engineering unless you actually, had a very specific understanding of how those general skills were to be applied, right? So if you're like AI engineer, okay, we need you to go and we're going to need you to implement some kind of AI enabled automation for these other things we've got going on here. Well, then tell us what the other things are, right? Tell us what you're working with here. Tell us what are the other stacks, what are the other teams, So when they're asking for AI engineer, maybe it reads more like a consultant job description. I think that's a warning sign that you could be dealing with a ghost job. Okay. Another warning sign: no clear story or mission. This kind of ties into what I just said, but the job posting doesn't really. It sort of seems to just be floating out there, right? There's no tie-in with anything else the company's doing, right? If it's some kind of medical or health-related company, and they don't explain like this is what we're going to be doing with AI. This is how we're going to be using it. That's kind of weird, right? I mean, again, it goes back to this idea that they don't have a specific understanding or a specific direction that they're going, right? Again, another warning sign, I think, of a potential ghost job there. Compensation, skewed compensation. I have seen this a lot lately, and this is pretty strange, to be honest with you, because I've been in this world for a long time, and typically compensation, it's either not listed or it's pretty within pretty well defined range. But what I've seen lately is you get just really high numbers or really low numbers. Okay, and I think this is an indication that they're testing the waters, right, to see who's going to bite, right? So who's going to apply for the low end jobs? When I say low end, I mean low compensation jobs. Who's going to apply for the really high end ones? And then now we can take those and we can sort of see like, all right, we can sort of play these against each other, right? So if somebody says, I want 200K, I expect 200K, they're going to look and be like, well, this other position, same job description, which of course is going to be really vague, they'll accept, 95K. Oh, well, so they could use that potentially to sort of play off each other. I'm not saying that's always the reason. I think whenever you're dealing with ghost jobs anyway, the descriptions are going to be vague, and that's going to make it hard to sort of figure out the right compensation. But again, it just goes back to testing the waters, seeing what will make people bite. Another thing I've run into, and this is more so, I would say, when you're actually speaking with a recruiter. If they seem really interested in your compensation expectations. Now, it's totally normal for a recruiter or a hiring manager to just ask your desired salary, right? That's a normal thing. There's nothing strange about that. But if you say, I'm flexible, I'm willing to consider anything, let's just say, I hate to say it like this, but let's just say you're desperate. You're honest and you say, listen, I need a job. I'm not going to be picky. I'll accept whatever you're willing to pay me. Okay. If they still push you for a specific number, that's data collection, right? They're not serious about filling that role, right? They're not serious because if they were serious, right? If somebody comes and says, I need a job, I've got the skills, I'll accept whatever you want to pay me. And you're like, well, what's your number? No, that's if you're serious, you would be like, yeah, come on, let's hire this person because they've got the skills and they're willing and they're ready to go. Why would you create a barrier for them in that way? Unless the job didn't exist and you actually had no intention of hiring anybody. Another one is very rigid education requirements. And this is, I think, a very, very clear sign that if a job description asks for, or not just asks for, but insists, it demands a bachelor's degree and will not accept experience as a substitute, that is an indication that it was written by HR and not somebody in IT. Now, the reason I say that is, like I said, I've been in this world for a long time. I could go back 20 years. This has been consistent. Positions will say bachelor's degree or experience, right? We'll accept experience in lieu of a bachelor's degree, okay? Because frankly, nobody really cares about a piece of paper. It's traditional in the IT world to accept experience in lieu of education. And the obvious reason for that is that university education is always outdated. By the time you graduate, you're already probably like 10 years behind, okay? Because university curriculum is behind, textbooks, even online curricula is behind. So by the time you get out and you get your piece of paper that says you graduated, well, guess what? Everything you learned is probably going to be obsolete anyway. Not everything, but a lot of it's going to be obsolete. So I think this is probably the biggest red flag. If you see a job posting that says you must have a bachelor's degree, and even if you have the bachelor's degree, okay, if you see that and it says you must have a bachelor's degree and that's it, there's no accepting experience, I would tread very carefully and if it looks like a role you're interested in, do your due diligence and try to figure out whether it's a ghost job or not, because I think that is one of the biggest red flags. And put it in the broader context, right? If a company says, we need this role for this new emerging technology, again, use AI as an example, we need this AI engineer, bleeding edge, right? You got to have a degree that perhaps you got 10, 15, however many years ago, 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's going to have very little relevance to this new cutting edge role that we're hiring for. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't go together, right? And it speaks to somebody, it indicates somebody wrote this that they don't know, they don't understand what they're asking for, okay? And again, I think it's just a sign that either HR wrote it or somebody had GPT write it and post it. Another one I alluded to already, one-way rejection. Another warning sign I alluded to earlier is this one-way rejection. You apply, you've got the right qualification, you get back some just blank rejection. Sorry, we've decided not to move forward with your application. No explanation, nothing else, okay? Ghost job. Almost 100% it's a ghost. Not saying that these form letter rejections don't exist, but like I said, when they are saying, we're hiring, we really want to hire somebody, you apply, they just kind of ignore you, and then the position still stays up, right? They don't fill it. Ghost job, okay? Another one related to if you're actually speaking to a recruiter, if there is a recruiter involved or a hiring manager, when you speak to them and you ask direct questions and they dodge your very direct questions and they act uninterested, right? Even after they hear your qualifications, you might be like the perfect fit for the role and they're just sort of like not really excited about it. That's a big warning sign. Recruiters usually get a cut, right? So if they finding a qualified candidate for a recruiter, it's like finding money on the ground.